Good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are turning in. This is Preston Smith, the editor-in-chief of The Corners. That's www.thecorners.pl. And also, I hope, you're a detective in Central Europe, your risk intelligence agent in Central Europe with CDDI. You can find that at cddi.pl. And this is the three things. Now, for those of you that have been tuning in, I really appreciate you liking and subscribing. So go ahead and do that now. Like, subscribe. It's going to keep me on the air and keep us talking about the things that you want to hear. And we've got three interesting topics this week, I can say. The first one, actually, I forgot to even say it, didn't I? We are coming from MRP Studios. I got to say that. Thanks, Evgeny. Thanks. But now, back to the three things. The first thing, I've listened to your requests, you guys that have been subscribing and liking, even sending me private messages. I don't know how some of you got those that mail, but we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine, and I'm going to run through the front from north to south. And the reason why I'm going to start in the north, I brought this up before, Kupiansk, Svatove. I'm a little worried about what's going on up there. But in the south, we have a little bit more positive news, at least according to the Ukrainian General Staff, and we're going to talk about that. But as you can tell, there are two other things on the schedule, and they're a bit more formal today because, hey, I'm wearing a jacket. I never wear a tie. I hate wearing ties if I can help it. But we have guests. Yes, we have guests. In the second segment of our show today, we have Wojcik. He's an expert on all things military. He's got a military background. He's the head of the Kościuszko chain. Isn't that funny? That's still hard for me to pronounce. Jestem tak długo w Polsce I nie mogę wymawiać Kościuszko chain. The Kościuszko chain, and he also was a senior fellow director at the Center for European Policy, based in Warsaw. Like I said, he can tell us about any and all things military. Actually, he's probably more specialized in that because specialists are specialists. But we have a lot of questions to ask him, and I've filtered some of those questions through you guys that have sent me these private messages. And again, I don't know how you got one of my emails, but you did. Find anything on the ONET. OSINT, Open Source Intelligence. It's amazing what you can find out there. And we're going to go through what he thinks about what is going on, what he thinks about the weaponization of the Ukrainians, how that's working, and the Russians. There's a lot of topics to talk about there. But that's also going to lead us to our third thing, our third segment. And the third segment is kind of dear to my heart. We're going to have the director of the Warsaw Christian Joy Foundation. That's the, if I remember, it's Chrześcijańskie Fundacje Radość, something like that. We'll have Henryk tell us about it. The director of that is Henryk Podsiadly. Henryk, an amazing guy. When the war started, he, through his, kind of informal network of churches in Ukraine, he started setting up a systematic logistics chain to get aid into Ukraine. Now, he's not the biggest, but he's been one of the most efficient. I've been involved with him. Some of the other expats in Warsaw have, but I wanted to have him on so he can tell you, he can come straight from from the horse's mouth, from Henryk Podsiadly, and he can tell you about that because I think it will make you think. Now, the last thing I'm going to say before we get into the war in Ukraine, what's happening on the front. Tune in, check out www.thecorners.pl. I hope you actually checked out the article which I wrote, a question and answer interview with Patrick Patterson. He's a photographer out of Texas. I'm also from Texas, so hey, there's a kinship there. But he spent quite a bit of time in Ukraine taking photos and traveling, and his point of view is quite interesting. Now, I showed some of his photos in the last episode of the three things. That interview is already on the site, but the second part, there's actually going to be three parts, but the second part is going to go up maybe tomorrow or the next day, sometime this week, so look out for that. Now, let's get into it. The first thing, what is going on the front in Ukraine? Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about what is going on the front as best we know in Ukraine. Now, I did say, and I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, this vlog is not just going to be about the war in Ukraine, even if it practically is in today's segment. Last week, I think I promised that we'd get back into child custody and what happens with surveillance, etc. We are going to get to that, but so many things are happening that are so topical right now, and the guests that we managed to sort out for this show are important, yeah, we are going to focus on it, but we have to focus on it in a sense, because we're getting into a pivotal week. Now, I said maybe a show or two back that these next couple of weeks could wind up being critical for Ukraine. I actually still believe that, and I am a little bit worried. So as I mentioned, we're going to go from north to south. Now, in the south, according to Ukrainian General Staff, notices what they put out, there may be some signs for optimism, some progress. In the north, I'm a bit worried, as I just told you, I'm a bit worried. But before we get to that, let's talk about what's going on in the Black Sea. Now, as you know, the Black Sea Initiative, the grain deal is dead for now. The Russians said, no more, that's it, we're done. Some might blame that on Zelensky, they might blame it on this and that, but you know, it was coming. It was a long time coming, and it wasn't just, you know, about hitting bridges the Russians were showing dissatisfaction with that for a while, and there was a threat of that. And as the war has progressed and not really gone how they wanted, you know, you could kind of see this coming. Now, one question that I've gotten from viewers and even just from friends who say, well, why don't the Allies or why don't ships just run the blockade? Because would the Russians dare try to sink ships that are internationally registered ships, not just Ukrainian ships? Well, the problem right there is insurance. If you go back to, you know, seafaring history, all the way back to, say, the UK, you'll find that there's always been, when you get into transporting goods by sea, even risky, crazy things, way back, you know, in hundreds of years ago when they were, you know, basically plundering South America and getting gold out of there, insurance played a big part. It still plays a big part. Now, there were a couple of attempts already of ships that tried to make their way to up the Danube to other ports. And what it seems like is happening, the Russians see this and, okay, they aren't really ready maybe to go after, you know, an internationally registered ship that's not a Ukrainian ship, but they will bomb a port to smithereens. Okay, so that's already a huge problem. But what the Ukrainians have done, they've also turned up the heat. You probably have seen the video of a Russian warship getting hit by a sea drone. Now, a sea drone, if you haven't seen a picture of those, when they first started talking about it, they were talking about it's like a jet ski loaded down. Well, it's not exactly like that. It looks literally like kind of an arrowhead. It's very low in profile, can carry 400, 500 pounds of explosives. There's a video out there, maybe we'll get it up here, where you see it moving in and it's targeting a Russian ship. This was the Olenegorski Gornyak, and the ship was damaged. It was listing to the side, but they also hit a second ship, and this was a tanker that was damaged in the Kerch Strait. Now, it hit the engine room, supposedly. The Russians said nobody was hurt. The tanker still stayed afloat. Tugboats were trying to, and nothing started leaking. And this is we're going to talk a little bit about this with Ray, with our first guest. You know, the different sides of war, and achievement also might mean catastrophic damage. There apparently are no leaks. This was like a chemical oil tanker, no leaks into the Baltic, but there are lots of aspects to discuss on these topics, both being, you know, for and against, or devil's advocate, whatever. But this does seem to have shaken up the Russians. You know what the Russians do? Then they promise, well, we're going to show you what we can do next, which usually means more missile strikes. And I think we can anticipate that. But now let's talk about the front, because that's where many people ask a lot of questions. Now, I'm going to put up these maps, which are mostly taken from Deep State UA. You got to give those guys credit. I may put up some Google Maps so you get a better idea what some of these little small cities are. But let's talk about what's going on in the north. Now, we talked about along that Kupiansk front and then down to Svatove. There was a couple weeks ago, I mentioned that I was worried. There's a buildup supposedly of 100,000 Russians. If you want to simplify things, you can kind of say, and this is what I've heard again and again, and I'm not saying it's exactly accurate because it's hard to actually be accurate when you're following this. Even if I try to check out the different vlogs, the Russian vlogs, the different vlogs in different languages, the Polish ones, whatever. But if you want to say that, say we have, let's estimate we got 100,000 Russians in the southern front, 100,000 Russians more up in the middle, and then up north, Kupiansk, Svatove, 100,000 up around there. Now there was a push, and I told you about this push that it seemed like the buildup was in Kupiansk, but then a little bit further south where you have more Svatove, and I was pointing out Borova, right? And there was a push towards Borova, and the reason why that was a worry was because the Ukrainians have not, now I'm not saying they haven't dug in, they haven't put mines down, but it's not like down in Zaporizhzhia what the Russians have done, where just endless trenches, endless mines, etc. And so the worry was that these guys started getting some momentum, then they might push all the way through, and if they took Borova, well, that actually is going to cause the Ukrainians some real difficulties. The other issue is if they actually broke through, there's going to be some open country, and you never know how far they could go. Now, if we talk about what's going on first in Kupiansk, which is a little bit further north, it did seem as if everything kind of petered out after a while. I put this down to the Russians having trouble with logistics. I think that is probably correct, because it does seem like they picked that back up again. Now, on the map, you'll see they appear to be driving down from the north towards, from Limenpershi to Sikivka, and this is like an accentuated drive, and it may be something serious. We did talk about what was already happening when you're going a little farther south, where it looked like the Ukrainians stopped them in Nadia. We think that actually, in the Svatove front, we think that probably actually did happen, but it does look like the Russians probably captured Serhivka, and they may have taken Nadia again, they may have been stopped there. I still am worried about this. I think this whole northern sector, when I say North Kupiansk, Svatove, that whole northern sector could be a vulnerability. I hope it is not. Now, the signs are that the Ukrainians are moving quickly to get reinforcements to stop any kind of momentum there. And again, the Russians probably have trouble with their logistics. So I don't want to like fearmonger here. I don't expect suddenly a huge breakthrough in a drive, but I do think this is something to pay attention to. Now, if you go a little bit further south and you get to kind of, if you check out the map, you get to Karmazanivka. Here, what is interesting is the Ukrainians may be turning the tables and driving actually directly down the Russians' throat in that area. So you've got in the north where you got the Russians picking up their offensive again, the Ukrainians trying to stop them, but a little further south, you have the Ukrainians driving. So it's a little bit, like in boxing, one's going over the top, the other's going under to the body. We're going to see how that works. Now, let's get down to Bakhmut. Okay, I'm going to let's go all the way down to Bakhmut, because that's where we're getting a lot of news. As we mentioned a week ago, it looks like immediately north of Bakhmut, that there's not a lot going on there. At least the Ukrainians haven't been able to make a lot of progress there, where they have consistently said that they're making progress more south of Bakhmut. But what is interesting, it looks like maybe if you go still further north of Bakhmut, that the Ukrainians are actually coming down, and they're coming down hard in that area. Now, if I took a look at the maps, and I would actually bring this map up on the screen to show you this, you'll kind of see what maybe is happening here. The immediate kind of pincer strike. So if you're talking about right in the north around the top of Bakhmut, and right in the south along the bottom of Bakhmut, which would sort of maybe catch these Russians in the middle, that may have been augmented, that right now that the Ukrainians are coming down from a little bit further north and coming down to try to maybe pull off the same type of job. Now, what is interesting, and I'm talking about kind of coming down from, I guess you would say from the Krasnohora type area, or towards that area from Orikovo, Vasilivka. Now, I'm not saying that I can't say I know this for sure what is going through the Ukrainian Strategic Command's minds right now, but that does seem like something that they may have started to ramp up. In the south, there was a lot of talk about Andriivka and Klishchivka. And, we were hearing that first the Ukrainians had took it or they'd taken part of Klishchivka, and then they'd, now not a lot seems to be happening there. Maybe the Russian resistance, they bolstered their resistance, and maybe it's a bit of a stalemate, which would maybe cause the Ukrainians to drive down from further north. What is interesting is, as I mentioned before, when you get into these towns, these areas now, whether you're talking about Bakhmut, whether you're talking about Staromaiske, they seem to be so obliterated that actually holding them or taking control of them may not be something that is particularly tenable for either side. And so we're starting to see more of these types of battles where you've got Bakhmut here. Well, you don't want to sit in the middle of Bakhmut because you're getting, shelled by whichever side is in control. The same type of thing in Staromaiske, the same type of thing down in Robotine. We're seeing this again and again and again, and I would kind of expect as this goes on, if there are breakthroughs, they're going to hit one of these villages, flatten it, but then kind of actually divert around and try to get behind them. Now, if we go a little bit further south, we do need to talk about Staromaiske. There is actually, supposedly there's a push possibly east of Vuhledar, but let's talk about Staromaiske because we sort of focused on that, and that has been a common focus in the news. Again, if you take a look at the map of that, you will see it's become kind of a no man's land. There was talk of fighting, believe it or not, in Zavitny Bazhanya, which is actually going to be further beyond. It's as if the Ukrainians had driven all the way through and gotten in, and they were fighting there. But that noise about fighting there has kind of maybe disappeared. What is interesting is that kind of like what I was telling you about in Bakhmut, again, you have this sort of maybe further to the north, this push by the Ukrainians. Now, I mentioned last time that what could be extremely important when it comes to Staromaiske is going to be Urozhaine. That could be key there. However, don't have a lot of news as to how that is going. It seems to be that this is, are these new drives, are they getting somewhere or not? We don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. I bet you we're going to find out, though, in the next 4 or 5 days. Now, let's talk about Robotine, and let's talk about Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainian General Staff has come out, and they've said something that is quite interesting, and I guess they're talking about Robotine, and that is that the Ukrainians have breached the first line, and they're in the intermediate defense, so somewhere between the first line of defense and maybe the third line of defense of the Russians. It is hard to know what this means. Now it does, if you take a look at the different maps, if you take a look at some of the signals that you're getting and you go through the logs and the videos, it does seem like possibly at Robotine, for example, in Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainians crossed one trench, but then there's more minefields, and then there's going to be another trench, there's going to be more fortifications. So we don't know exactly what's going on there, but it's interesting that the Ukrainians came out and said, yeah, we have made progress at this point. What does this progress mean? Does this signal a breakthrough? Well, I don't know. To be honest, when you're reading, and now there's some journalists are coming out, you guys can check that. Maybe I'll put some links when you hit guys that are correspondents that are writing for the New York Times or for various publications, and pretty horrific stuff when they're talking to the sappers, guys who are experienced, who know what they're doing, who are still leading sappers in, talking about their own guys getting killed or losing fingers or losing part of a foot, that type of thing. This just seems to be horrendous, and somehow they are still making progress, which is just mind-blowing, to be honest. But that's going to lead us now to the second thing, and we're going to get in a real military expert in Wojcik and ask him about this, and also ask him quite a few other questions when it comes to what he thinks is going to happen in this war, where it's going to go, and even some of maybe the political connotations of what is going on right now. So stay tuned. Okay, we're back for the second thing, and I'm here with Wojcik. He is a retired colonel in the U.S. military. He's an attaché for the government out here at the embassy in Warsaw. He knows his stuff when it comes to military issues, and I'm going to give him some hard questions when it comes to what is happening in Ukraine. But great to have you here.
Oh, fantastic to be here. Thank you.
And I'm going to get right into it. And I'm going to get maybe the hardest, toughest question, the most controversial question first. And that is going to be, what is the outlook? Now, I'm setting this up, kind of setting you up to fail. Because no matter what you say, the Ukrainians can say you're being too pessimistic, the Americans saying you're too optimistic. But the reality is, as we both know, that the Ukrainian counteroffensive began without air support, without 3-to-1 superiority when it comes, which I understand, not being in the military, being a complete layman here, but what you would be looking for, and with some delays when it came to getting the proper equipment that we know they wanted to start this invasion. Now we have a situation where, depending on who you listen to, it's bogged down. There is some progress being made, maybe not being fast enough, etc. First question, the hardest question. How do you see this going?
No, great one. Well, first, to start off, we shouldn't refer to this as an invasion, of course, because we're talking about a counteroffensive to retake sovereign Ukrainian territory.
Counteroffensive to take their own. You're exactly right.
And I think what we should keep in mind is a couple things from the beginning of the war, and then a few things we've seen along the way that we've come to appreciate from the Ukrainians. Number one is, at the end of the day, the morale of the Ukrainians is going to see them through. Their willingness to fight this out. There's some estimates now because of the devastation that's happened in the minefields. There's up to 50 to 70,000 amputees from in this war.
50 to 70,000.
50 to 70,000. And compared to numbers from World War I, those approach total numbers of either the Brits or the Germans in World War I warfare.
For the total war?
For the total, the 4 years of World War I. So these are the numbers that Ukraine is sustaining at this point. So that's definitely tells you something.
That is staggering.
It is staggering, but at the same time, there will. And one thing we've always known, I think, from the beginning, I think most people that watch this, is that the big mistake Russia made was thinking somehow the Ukrainians were going to, or a lot of Ukrainians were going to end up welcoming, Russia in there. That didn't happen. It's not going to happen. And even if somehow, miraculously, Russia turned the tables totally on the Ukrainians and were able to make some great gains, seal off the whole eastern corridor down to Crimea, protect their ships and so forth. Even if they were able to do that, there's no question that the Ukrainians are going to fight as long as it takes to regain sovereign territory. They've made those statements and they've shown that in their willingness to fight. So I think what's happened here, a couple things, different perspectives.
Right.
So you got the perspective of, the Westerners looking at this, the United States, others providing this training, providing the new equipment, trying to rapidly build some capabilities. And that's not insignificant. We've done a lot of work at Grafenwehr, Germany, at the U.S. Combined Multinational Training Center, Germans at their training center, Poles at their training center, others, to work with the ground forces, getting them up to speed on new Leopard tanks, or actually older Leopard tanks.
But it's new technology for them.
New to the Ukrainians. But that was pretty much, a fire hose kind of task, trying to do that in those few months. And we should keep in mind that the Ukrainian forces to date have been absorbing a newer, just a continuous flow of a variety of types of equipment from different nations. That's not easy. And the predictions, having been in this field before in one of my embassy tours here, the estimates of how long it takes to integrate just a single system. The F-16 coming to Poland in 2006, the first one arrived. It took 3 years for the final delivery. The third year, 2009, Poland had its 48 F-16s.
Yeah.
But it took many, many years after that to get them fully
Okay,
operational.
well, let's stop you right there, because that's actually a great question. First of all, now the Biden administration suggested that they would try to get some F-16s here as quickly as possible, maybe by the end of the year. Interestingly, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, more conservative on that point, they were saying maybe in the spring of next year. Now, there have been fighter pilots that have been training with them, so maybe that accelerates the program. But still, we're not talking about, a fleet of, of F-16s. They were talking about a small number. Is that going to impact the war if 20 F-16s were shipped here? Or is this all still, should we be treating this as maybe necessary propaganda, but more of kind of an emotional boost, a propaganda boost? How should we look at that?
I think two things. One is we've got to see where we're at with the war.
Right.
It's possible by the time the F-16s get here, the war's over. There's some kind of settlement because the punishment is so hard. The other thing to think about with this, and you and I have talked about this before, is the delay in making decisions like this, the F-16 decision, or the armor decision, or the HIMARS decision, or the Patriot. You could go on and on. Even remember, in the beginning of the war, there was a debate, oh, should we send them Stingers, just small, short-range air defense. But so we've continued to let the Russians have the initiative because of our fear of escalation, and we've held back incrementally sending on. So this delay on the F-16s, potentially the F-16s could be operational in the next few months if we had started the program last year. So getting back to your fine point, though, one of the problems, the U.S. has said, anybody wants to provide F-16s, go ahead and do it. Yeah. Anybody wants to provide training. The U.S. has not taken ownership of this. We should. We built that aircraft. It's an Air Force prime operational aircraft. We've done it for decades. We have many allies that can help. Yeah. But what's needed is a lead nation for this. And I think the Biden administration has looked at this and feels like, hey, we're the lead nation on this. We're the lead on all the HIMARS, the Patriots, and the 155 777s, so that maybe we can get another, but no other nation really has the capability to do that. The other question is, you hear a lot of Air Force guys talk about this. Right. Well, how are we going to get them trained up on the maintenance? So how are we going to get the part? No, that all has to be done by contractors. Right. And you may have to do it out of Poland or something and work it across the border. But so you need to focus on the pilots and maybe the primary maintainers, the ones that are doing the daily things, and get those guys up to speed. The other thing is, I think there should be a larger or deeper consideration of this A-10 aircraft, the old
the Warthog.
Yeah, the old 1970s, sort of close air support.
I was going to ask you about that. It's funny you brought that up. Would that aircraft survive in the current theater of war, however? Because we saw the Ukrainians who became famous with kind of their daring do when it came to their work as pilots, and to the point that they were taking risks that probably shocked the Russians. But also the Ukrainians knocked down plenty of Russian aircraft, even modern aircraft. The Warthog is not the fastest aircraft in the sky. It's great for ground sport, as I understand it, but would it stand up to what we're seeing now with, it's easy to knock the Russians and to say that, okay, they haven't shown to be flexible, quick, except sometimes they do. Sometimes they've got attack helicopters that are suddenly showing up on the front that have been modified, the KA, if I believe it, and that was something that's catching people off guard. They've got longer range. So would a Warthog actually survive? I mean, I believe it could be great for ground support, but is it something that's still, because they wanted to discontinue it because the theory was that it wouldn't survive.
Well, what the Russians have shown us, we look at their own air defense capabilities inside of Russia, and then the fact that the Ukrainians are still flying MiG-29s, and we're talking about delivering weapon systems, the Storm Shadow, that are going to be mounted on MiG-29s. So you would have to use it in a very judicious way, in my view, the A-10, for specific missions, and you would have to find ways to either tie up the air defense or defeat the air defense, if possible,
Right.
with other things. Potentially, look at the innovative things the Ukrainians have done so far, faking those operations so that they could go back down to Kherson. So the Ukrainians have shown a large or great capacity for innovation, agility. So I would say they could find a way to employ this aircraft. And I don't mean bring the A-10 instead of the F-16.
Right.
Should start the F-16 yesterday, should start the A-10 yesterday,
Right.
and employ them where it makes sense. That's what I say.
Okay, so if I'm going to read into what you told me, and not to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to just a little bit. And this is also coming from me, because I have to admit I was quite frustrated with the way that Germany handled or didn't supply. When you kept, at first there's going to be this many Leopards, then they're not quite sending them, then they're going to send them. There was kind of a slowdown. I'm going to pick on Germany right now, but if we pick on, let's just say the Allies, NATO, Germany, France, the United States, now we are seeing a bit of a blame game starting. Or that's what it seems to be, where you've got in the press articles showing up saying the Ukrainians are stepping away from the American training and the more modern approach to warfare. And some of the things I've seen, the Ukrainians are starting to be too sequential. They're not actually coordinating the way they could. But on the flip side, the Allied NATO or the NATO countries took far too long to get the weapons to Ukraine in time for them, because we have to deal with the weather too. There's also the weather issue. So is the U.S., in the U.S. and Germany and France, are they just being completely hypocritical with this? And I'm going to throw in one more teaser. I talked to a lot of journalists, journalists that have connections in Brussels, whatever, and journalists tend to be very cynical. I'm very cynical. But I will say that the vibe I get is that there are European politicians that would be fine with this war just going on forever.
Sad to hear if that's true. But if you look at, the actions or the decisions that are happening, it's easy to be skeptical that way.
Yeah.
When we talk about these delays in weapons, these political moments where there's a perfect opportunity in July to make a concrete decision about how we're going to bring Ukraine to NATO.
Right.
And I'm on the aggressive side. There's a couple guys in the Atlantic Council that wrote an article before the summit talking about, hey, bring them in now and extend Article 5 to that part of Ukraine that's not in contention, so that you don't have to say, NATO's going to war tomorrow, and then figure out how you're going to do the rest after the war's over. So that's pretty aggressive, but I mean...
But it's actually a mirror of what Russia has said about Crimea.
Exactly. That's what they've said.
You're just basically turning it back on the Russians.
Which, by the way, just, kind of off this topic a little bit, the thing that really gets me about the Crimea and the annexations of the Luhansk and Donetsk is that on one hand, there's still another debate when we talk about transferring weapons about, if we do that, the Ukrainians might shoot those into Russia.
Shoot them,
and we wouldn't want that, because the Russians would see that as an attack on their sovereign territory. But at the same time, the Russians are saying Crimea and eastern Ukraine are sovereign territory, and we're in a hot war, trying to help Ukraine take those. So, back to the counteroffensive. I think a couple other things just to add some more perspective. One is, D-Day landings. It takes more than 2 months to get through the first major defensive lines in Normandy.
Right.
It takes until late August to sort of get to the wrap-up point of the Normandy campaign. By the way, where our great allies, the Poles, play a significant role at that part. The Poles land an armored division during the operations, not on D-Day, but during the operation, and they play a big role at the Fillet Gap, where the Polish armored division.
So then maybe I'm being a little bit too pessimistic when I look. I mean, I've even said already on the show that I see the next 10 days, 2 weeks as being critical. Now, the Ukrainians and I'm assuming this is by Robotina in Zaporizhzhia, that they've gotten through the first line I don't know exactly. No one seems to really know what that means. But if you look on, say, the Deep State UA maps or some of the bloggers, and you take into account some of the Russian blogs, et cetera, that looks like they've gotten past the first trench in some points. And then maybe they're getting to the second lines. Of course, we know there can be kilometers of mines. But maybe I'm being too pessimistic. They need more time for these bridgeheads, that there could still be a breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think there will. And I think the other thing to think about is, again, going back to the weapons, demining systems.
Yeah.
There in the U.S. Army, there's special systems to literally clear lanes for hundreds of meters in a minefield, with basically a rocket launch system that does that. Delivery of these cluster munitions is very important too. You and I were talking about additional Russian forces that could pour over and add to the fight. Because the Russians are learning. One thing we've learned is the Russians are clumsy, inept, have the most corrupt MOD in the world, but they know how to change dynamically in some cases. So they've upgraded their recruiting model, making it more local. They've been able to continue their buildup, and then their beliefs at home have not changed much. I've seen since the beginning of the war.
Like that.
So the Russians have the ability to add more and more troops to this. That's one of the things the Westerners keep talking about and worry about, where the cluster munitions, when we gave those to the Ukrainians, and now they have them, we said this is a limited amount. It's just a stopgap because we don't have enough of the 155 regular rounds.
Right.
But really, this is a key piece of equipment too.
Well, it's already proven very effective.
It's super effective. Yeah. And you can tie up multiple kilometers of areas where the Russia become no-go zones immediately for the Russians. And you don't have all the Ukrainian forces to throw against a large offensive from the Russians now. So you need that kind of system. And so us couching this as some kind of temporary replacement is another mistake on the resupply front.
Right. Okay. Look, I tell you what, we're gonna finish it there. I might want to have you back though, and maybe in 2 weeks. I want to see what happens over the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I hope that I've been too pessimistic, although I don't want to sound that I'm not pro-Ukraine, because I am, but I'm just worried. One thing I can say though, to end this, and it's an echo of what you just said. When I speak, again, with journalists, with volunteers, the next guest on the show, he's actually done incredible things to get aid and food supplies into Ukraine. But when I talk to some of those guys coming back and forth, and when I talk to Patrick Patterson, who is a photographer that I've already highlighted on the show, I'm going to get him on there. And I ask, or even actually, there's a couple of guys that volunteered and they came back from Ukraine, Americans. And I said, what do the Ukrainian soldiers on the front say? Have they had enough? Mm-hmm. And one Ukrainian told me, and this is how he put it, he said, it's horrible. Guys are getting killed, they're getting maimed, but they're so mad. Mm-hmm. They just all they want to do is kill. Mm-hmm. That is a powerful, almost frightening statement. Mm-hmm. When I talked to others, they said, no, they're never going to give up. Mm-hmm. They're never going to give up. They're never going to forgive.
Yeah.
And you can see it when we're seeing kilometers of ground taken despite the lack of air cover and air support. I just don't understand why the Russians, I just don't understand the point.
Yeah.
I honestly don't. Now, there's one last topic that I want to throw in. I was going to end it there, but there's one last topic, and that is this kind of tiff, and I hope that's all it is. It's like a family tiff when we're talking about the grain deal. The end of the grain initiative in Russia, that's one thing. But the Poles and the Ukrainians not getting along because, well, the Poles are protecting their home market. And yes, there's politics involved. We know... and I don't want to get too far into Polish politics. When you get into the Law and Justice Party, peace, etc., they have a constituency that they want to protect. And we're coming up to new elections, and they actually have a challenge this time. But there's a bigger picture here, because we have a worldwide potential food crisis that's going to be triggered by this grain deal again. How do you see this playing out? We had both sides calling each other's diplomats on the carpet. You know, you almost hate to be a diplomat these days, right? And we had statements by Prime Minister Morawiecki in Poland saying these guys should remember that our diplomat stayed. He was the only diplomat that stayed in Ukraine when the war started, when the invasion started, when they hit, they tried to take Kiev. And then you had the Ukrainians saying, well, how dare you say that we're not appreciative, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what do you think about this? Is this going to blow over in 2 days?
It's not going to blow over in 2 days, but
Right.
it's not going to be a big deal.
Okay.
So there's a couple things. One is, I mean, we should think, how in the world are the Poles and Ukrainians getting along so well, working so closely together when they have this really, really devastating World War II history,
They do.
where tens of thousands of Poles are attacked in a genocide type attack. So the fact that the Poles sort of put that as a priority to address over these last 3 decades since the Cold War ended,
Right.
but not as the priority. And they early in the 90s all the way to now, and you can see it in spades in the war, more than double all the tanks given to Ukraine so far come from Poland.
Sure.
Poland was first on so many issues. And the Prime Minister, he's right. Prime Minister Morawiecki was one of 3 prime ministers that first showed up in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Ambassador Chihotsky, he's a great guy. He stayed
Yeah.
there. Every embassy cleared out. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a valid point. But the point is, Poland is not arguing. First off, it's Poland and 4 other countries.
Yeah,
it's not just Poland. And
That's true.
Poland is arguing, hey, we're not blocking grain shipments. We're just saying we don't want it flooded into our markets.
Right.
And so they want to protect their market. That's a
Right.
valid point. And they're not stopping Ukrainian grain to come through the Polish ground system and be delivered elsewhere. So I think that's actually a good compromise, and I think the Ukrainians should understand it. And the point the Poles are making, the government, is that, hey, by the way, we are doing a lot, and this isn't really asking a lot. We're not stopping the grain from getting to the world, and we're not keeping people from starving because of it.
Then, in your opinion, why are the Ukrainians so upset about this?
I think the Ukrainians have, it's maybe similar to what happened at the NATO summit.
Right.
There were some initial, recrimination sort of comments from Zelensky and others about why didn't you invite us into NATO? I think there's some of that. And the Ukrainians, we try to reverse, put ourselves in their shoes. I mean, those guys are in a daily, onslaught of just artillery, drones. Zelensky could get hit any moment.
Yeah.
The fact that he's still around. So they have a short, horizon for we don't have time to deal with extra issues.
Right.
We're fighting a war. So Poland so anyway, I think this is, they'll work this out. It's not going to be a big deal.
Do you think, now that you brought that up, the NATO and the obvious disappointment that there wasn't at least a set timeline for Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think this put pressure on Ukraine to mount this counteroffensive and try to get some gains that maybe they wouldn't have launched it ahead of that?
Yeah, their timeline. One thing about the Ukrainians, they've been excellent at operational security, protecting plans and missions. I don't know if the NATO decision drove anything connected with. I think they're on their own timeline with this counteroffensive. But that said, if you drag out the NATO decision and you drag out weapons, you give the initiative to the enemy.
Sure.
And you create the situation where basically more Ukrainians are going to die because the West is saying this is an existential threat to the global order and existential threat to U.S. geopolitical position. Yet we're not acting like it. That's my problem with this. So, and then the last thing is NATO should step in now. Immediately, and there was a great article about this a few days ago by Admiral Stavridis. He was the former commander of EUCOM and SACEUR for NATO. And he said NATO should get in there to the Black Sea and take over the grain escort mission. And in my view, what you do when you do that, you get NATO ships back into the Black Sea. So now it's not just a Russian lake, as some call it. It's more or less contested water. The Russians know we're there, and we're staying there. It's the same idea with inviting or concrete way to get Ukraine into NATO. This, to me, takes one more point out of the Russian, thinking about, well, we can wait out till a next president comes, and then we can debate when, we can just keep it a frozen conflict, and they'll never join NATO, or something like that. So we're giving the Russians the initiative by delaying decisions and not making good decisions like taking over the grain escort, which NATO can do and NATO should do.
Excellent. Look, great points. I appreciate you being here. Hope to get you back in a few weeks. I hope that I'm being overly pessimistic, and God be with the Ukrainians. But what a tough battle. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. We're going to be back for the third thing. Henryk Podsiadly and the Christian Joy Foundation. Like I said, they're doing amazing things, getting food and supplies to Ukraine under very tough conditions, and I'm impressed with that guy. But hey, I'm impressed with you too, and thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Ukraina.
Slava Ukraina.
All right.
See y'all soon. Okay, we're back with the third thing, but you're not a thing. This is Henryk Podsiadly. I need to think about how to introduce these segments when I have people here. But anyway, the third thing. The third thing is something that I'm really excited about, really proud of, actually. Proud to know Henryk. Because he is, I'm going to tell everyone a little bit about you, but then you can tell us a lot more. He is the president of the Christian Joy Foundation, which in Polish, I believe, is Chrześcijańska Fundacja Radość, correct, right? And I think I might have said at the start of the show, the Warsaw Christian Joy Foundation. Sorry about that. But Radość is like kind of a suburb of Warsaw, so we're in the same vicinity. And the reason why I wanted to have Henryk on is we came to know each other during the spring after the war started. I was involved in some other work trying to place families. His organization at that time was already sending aid and food and supplies to Ukraine. And through a mutual friend, actually a pastor at a local church in Warsaw, we actually met, and we're going to get into that. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll go back to that first night of the war and what happened.
My name is Henryk Podsiadly. I'm the president of the Christian Joy Foundation based in Warsaw, Poland. I'm a husband, I'm a father of 2, and a grandpa of 5. I'm the happiest man in the world, actually.
Okay. I'm sitting next to the happiest man in the world. Right. I didn't know that. Okay. All right. And tell us a little bit about the foundation, because the foundation, you've been the head of the foundation for quite a long time.
18 years.
18 years. And what was kind of the primary goal?
The primary goal was 2 projects, actually. Food ministry and camp ministry. And within the time, it grew very big. And so we organized like 1,200 people camps in a year.
Right.
And we were working, still are working with the food bank.
But wait, these camps, this is before the war, right?
Yes.
This is before the war. These camps were for whom?
For orphans and poor children.
For orphans and poor children.
Yeah, they didn't pay a penny. None of them had one. But
they were out of Ukraine or out of Poland or both?
At the beginning, they were all Polish.
Right.
But a few years before the war started, we started getting Ukrainian children to our camps because there was quite a big minority of Ukrainians in Poland already.
Right.
2014.
Well, right, because 2014, the war actually was going on in Donetsk.
That's right.
And so these were orphans, or these were kids that their parents couldn't take care of them, or?
They were just refugees. They were new in Poland. They didn't know where to go. So we were just inviting them to our camps, provide good time and food and shelter.
Right. And then, Ted, let's go back to last year, the night of February 24th, when the war, this part of the war started. I remember because suddenly my phone started ringing. Actually, to tell you the truth, because of the crazy business I'm in, the detective industry risk consulting. We had a lot of contacts, friends in Ukraine in the same business who started to get in touch, say, look, the Russians are coming. We got to get people we know out, send family out. That was happening even before. So we were a little bit set up for placing families. But you started getting calls as well, right? On that first night?
Well, the first night was kind of a shock. We didn't know what to do. We didn't expect that. Actually, none of my friends believed it's actually going to happen.
They didn't think it was going to happen.
They didn't think. We didn't know.
Right.
But when it did happen, the next day, I started getting phone calls from everybody, especially from Ukrainian pastors of Ukrainian churches based here in Warsaw and all over Poland.
Right. And they were calling you to do what?
They were asking for food.
Right.
And for bunk beds, because all their churches became refugee camps.
Just that quickly, though?
That quickly. The first wave came the next day.
Right.
And just flooded Poland.
And so they needed food for the camps here in Warsaw, or they already needed food for the churches in Ukraine?
At first, they needed food to supply those refugees in Poland.
Right, right.
But when that was done, they asked for bunk beds because they had to double the amount of sleeping places in their buildings.
Right.
And then they asked for food because those friends of mine, pastors of Ukrainian churches here in Poland, they had their friends, pastors in Ukraine, all over Ukraine, asking them to do something, to help. So they called me, Henry, can you help? Can you do anything? What do you need? We need food, we need clothes, we need all kinds of...
And they called you because they knew that you had this...
Because I was already helping them.
In the sense of providing for orphans and getting food and all
because our
that.
charity is a registered charity and we have tools to get more supply.
But you weren't prepared for this.
I weren't.
No,
I wasn't. I thought at the beginning we are going to do something, but when the need was so great,
right,
I called my friends from abroad and say, hey, this is what we need to do.
Right.
Send us a lorry or two, because lorry in England, you know, and Northern Ireland. But they were sending all those big trucks, 43 of them from Northern Ireland only.
Okay, now this is you're talking about Colin Tinsley and Joanna Tinsley,
yes,
right? And they have a foundation or a...
They have a charity,
They have a charity foundation.
Yes, a kind of ministry. They are also working with children in Northern Ireland, but they are also helping me.
To back up, I met these guys now more than once because what happens is Henryk, he started, when I actually got to know you, you'd already started having these food drives.
Yes.
And so once a month or once every 6 weeks, it seemed, there would be a meeting and suddenly all these trucks and food and volunteers and Ukrainian vans. We're going to talk about how that works in a minute. But this is when I met the Tinsleys, and they would send a team for Northern Ireland. But they started raising money in Northern Ireland, or where did all this come from? Because they sent a lot.
Yes, when the war started, actually, the day before, Colin and I finished refugee camps,
right,
orphan camps in Warsaw, Poland.
Right.
And then Colin went to another place in Poland to do another camp because there was the winter break in another period of time. And he got calls from his home church.
Right.
And they said, Colin, we need to do something for Ukraine. We are going to collect food and clothes and whatever is needed and send it by a van to Poland and then over to Ukraine. And he said, that's okay, let's do it. And they started collecting stuff, and suddenly it was obvious that not one van, not 10, but 43 big lorries, 18-wheelers.
Semi-trucks, 18-wheeler trucks.
Yes.
We're on the way.
We're on the way, and they all landed in Poland, most of them in Warsaw.
Right.
And I was the one to...
Suddenly you were supposed to coordinate it
Yes,
all.
because Colin and I, we've been friends for ages, and we've done a lot of camps together and a lot of different projects, mission projects and humanitarian projects.
Okay, well, so let's talk about, if you guys take a look at the corners, you go to the website with www.thecorners.pl and you click on the mob headline, which is not about this, but that's it. But it will. The magazine opens up. You can flip through it, and you will see actually a story at the end of that sums some of this stuff up. But what happens, as I understand it, right, is that you get donations or people send trucks of food to Warsaw to this macro, which is in Ząbki.
In Ząbki near Warsaw, and
Yeah.
the macro is so gracious to us because they let us use this big giant parking lot for free.
Right.
They give us even the forklift for free with the
Right.
operator just to unload our trucks from Northern Ireland and reload them on the Ukrainian trucks that we invite from Ukraine to come pick it up. Sometimes it's not on a pallet, so it took 40 people just to reload one big truck over to the other
Oh,
Ukrainian
so it's just
truck.
packed into the truck, just however, and you've got to get it out of the truck and put
Right.
it into these Ukrainian
Yes.
vans. Okay, so that brings me to the next question, which is the Ukrainian. Okay, and this is something, and not to be offensive here, but when people call me and they ask me and they say, "I want to send aid to Ukraine," I'm not the guy. That's not what I was doing. We were trying to place families. And I really was just like a telephone operator. I didn't really do very much, so I don't want to act like I did. But because my guys, we were doing a little bit of that, I would get calls and say, I want to send food, money, supplies. And then they would say, well, how do I know where it's going? Because I would say, well, send it to Henryk and you guys.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, I've actually been there and seen you loading the trucks. But then they had the next question, how do I know what I'm sending is going to get to the right place?
Well, if you are sending money, of course,
Right.
to our foundation,
Right.
we are a charity registered in the court for 18 years. We
Right,
have the
right.
status OPP. And as far as the food and other stuff is concerned, I have friends, as I said, I have friends who are Ukrainian pastors of Ukrainian churches based here in Poland. And those pastors, they have their friends in Ukraine. Also, many of them are pastors of churches in Ukraine.
Right.
And those pastors in Ukraine call those pastors in Warsaw or other parts of Poland to help.
Right.
Because they are already here in a free world.
Right, right, right.
And there is a lot of other possibilities too.
And so these pastors tell the Ukrainian pastors to come up here to pick up the food.
Yes, and they call me.
Right.
Can you arrange some food run, food drive, whatever you call it?
Yeah.
Can you invite our vans from Ukraine to come get the food, get the humanitarian aid?
Okay.
And that's what we are doing for the last time.
How does that work? So what you're saying is these pastors, they get in a van and they drive it. I've seen the vans are like moving vans. They'll drive them up from Ukraine all the way up to Warsaw, where you have organized the food and supplies, and then the volunteers load the stuff and then they drive back. But they do that. They get a visa. How do they manage to leave the country? Because Ukrainian men can't leave the country, right? Because
those who have 3 children and more, they can leave the country.
They can leave the country.
And also those who are working for registered charities, they also can leave the country.
Right.
For a few days, and they come back.
Well, there was one of them that I remember I met, and I think his name was Sergey. You can correct me, I might be wrong, but he was telling me he drove from, this would have been in December, one of the first big food runs that I went to, that I saw what you guys were doing. He said he drove like 50 hours from Zaporizhia.
50 hours is actually 2 days. That's
Yeah.
possible if you take it into consideration that there is a border, and you can sometimes
Get stuck.
wait 10 hours at the border.
And some of these guys are driving out. I remember some of the drivers telling me that there were missiles falling around them when they left. And they drive all the way up, and then they're going to drive it back to these areas.
Unfortunately, I know cases that some of the volunteers, even Polish volunteers who went with their vans, a friend of mine runs a charity like mine,
Yeah.
and his volunteers got shot dead in Ukraine.
Right.
And his vehicle was just damaged. And
Was
that was
destroyed,
it.
yeah. And that was
Destroyed.
it.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah, that's tough to hear. Well, I remember, and this made an impression on me, and I mentioned it in the magazine, that one of the drivers came up with his sons, and his sons, they were 16, 17 years old, maybe?
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. But the first time, they looked like 16 or 17-year-olds. The second time I saw them, which was maybe a month and a half or 2 months later, they looked much, much older.
Like an adult.
Yeah, like an adult, like an adult. Now, tell me this. I got a couple more questions about the food runs. How much do you think that has been donated and delivered? Because at one of the food runs I saw, I mean, there's just pallets and pallets, and you're filling up these vans. What does a single food run look like? How many vans are full, and what are we talking about?
Well, the last food run that took place June 9th,
yeah,
we invited 43 vans from Ukraine.
Right.
Each van got 1 pallet of canned meat.
Right.
And the pallet is like 2,160, 300 grams cans
right.
of meat.
Okay.
So that's a lot already.
Yeah,
and each van got 1 pallet. And on top of that, they got also a lot of other stuff like humanitarian aid, new Nike clothes, shoes,
and there was
sportswear.
Pasta and
there was pasta, barley, buckwheat,
right.
whatever they kind of order or ask for, we try to get it for them.
Right. And then the drivers, when they take it to these locations, how do you, I mean, we talked about this already. So you trust your friends and they trust their friends, but do these guys run into issues along the way? I mean, like it is part of Ukraine, even when you get close to the war zone, you've got the military, you've got maybe bandits, you've got this kind of, I mean, parts of Ukraine are, you know, under siege.
Well, all charities run like based on trust.
Right.
I trust those pastors.
Right.
Those pastors in Poland, they trust their friends, pastors in Ukraine.
Right.
And those friends of theirs, pastors, they send their volunteers, the drivers that they trust. So I haven't heard of any like thing being stolen or
stolen that time.
Of course, there are some issues on the border. The Ukrainian customs officers, they are amazed and they wonder how is that possible that one van would get so much food for free and other stuff, new clothes, and they would like to charge it, but
so they were like wanted to charge like customs
sometimes
taxes.
Yes,
right.
It's rarely, but sometimes they would like to charge it, and then the drivers have to prove that it's for free. It's a gift.
It's a gift.
So
it's a charity.
My charity, on a head letter of the charity, we write a gift certificate in Polish and Ukrainian language, stamp, signature, and each van driver would get one of those. So, but sometimes it doesn't help, and they want to see photos how it's possible.
What you mean, photos of how it's being distributed, or
right here at the macro, and when they show,
even at the macro where it's coming from,
because and then the customs officer, they saw 43 vans, Ukrainian register plates, and all those trucks full of stuff being loaded, and they understood that's okay. You're right.
Then they let it through.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, there's another food drive coming up, right?
Yes, September 1st, Friday morning. I am going to invite 50 vans this time.
Vans.
That'll be a record. Hopefully, it's a big step of faith. So,
so how much do you need in donations to fill up 50 vans?
Just
approximately
300,000 zloty was worth of just the canned meat last time, with 43 vans. So maybe kind of.
So 300,000 zlotys.
400,000 zloty, which is $100,000 US.
$100,000 US around there.
Yeah.
Because 300,000, that would have been like $75,000. 300,000.
Yes, that's right.
But then that's not all that you delivered, because I saw the pallets of barley, the pallets of pasta. How much do you think has gone to Ukraine since you started this?
Wow, counting all those 43 big 18-wheeler trucks.
Oh, at that first, yeah.
A few million of US dollars.
Right. Well, congratulations. That's really something else, something to hear. And I tell you what we're going to do at the bottom, if you look at the YouTube channel and you'll see, more information. I'm going to make it easy for you. We're going to put the information for the foundation there, so you can donate in Polish zlotys or in euros or in dollars or in pounds. I think it's all going to be in there. And if you are in Warsaw, you can come help load and see for yourself, see what it looks like. I would bring I tell you what, when I go, because I'm getting old, I bring a weight belt to protect my back because it's actually a lot of work. It's not quick. It takes several hours and a lot of people unloading trucks or the pallets and helping these drivers pack it onto the vans, because you don't want them to get too exhausted before they've already driven all the way up to Warsaw. They've got to drive all the way back to Ukraine, and these are hard trips. So if you want to come out and help, you want to volunteer, that's great. That's in Ząbki, which is like a little suburb of Warsaw. If you want to donate, though, there's a lot of people already helping on the ground. The donations are key, so I would encourage you to do that. And I hope that this next food run is a big success.
Yes.
And really, I hope this war ends soon, because this is unbelievable what's going on. Otherwise, that's it, over and out. This is the end of the 3 things. I hope I see you next week. In the meantime, tune in to www.thecorners.pl. On the website, there are new stories, new blogs going up. A second part of Patrick Patterson, the photographer I told you about, that question and answer interview will go in. I think you'll find it very interesting. Next week, I'm not going to tell you. It's a secret, but I think you're going to find it interesting, and I hope to see you back. Otherwise, like and subscribe. Thanks a lot again, Henryk. Good
Thank you very much.
We'll see you soon.
See you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.